Hey book lovers, what you reading? I'm Eric, the oh so lonesome reader, and this is my super sexy reading wrap-up. How do you like my sexy talk? The theme of my reading in the past couple of weeks has been all about sex, just coincidentally, because the first two books that I read are about all things carnal, and then I also read Neel Mukherjee's new novel, which isn't sexy at all. Although, I have to say that his last novel, The Lives of Others, has one of the kinkiest scenes that I've ever read in any literature. Certainly in any Booker Prize shortlisted novel, as this novel was in, I think, 2014. So, if you're shy about talking about love, turn away now. Speaking of which, I haven't really gone to any bookish events recently because I've been wanting to get more reading time in. Although it was Pride in London last weekend and I made a video talking about all the great LGBT books that have influenced me. I'll throw a link up there in case you haven't watched it yet. And I did go to the National Theatre where they had a staged reading of Terrell Alvin McCraney's play Wig Out, which is all about the drag ball scene. In case you don't know, the film Moonlight, which won the Oscar for Best Picture this year, was based on a play that Terrell wrote called In Moonlight, Black Boys Look Blue. He also acted in this performance of Wig Out, and I can tell you, this guy can vogue the house down. And he also did a Q&A after the performance, and he spoke so passionately and meaningfully and powerfully about writing and social issues. And he also cried. I have never seen a writer cry on stage before. But he got so emotional talking about his students. He teaches teenagers how to write, and he talked about the pressures that they have to live with in society now. It was really beautiful and touching, and he is such a sexy and talented writer. Anyway, on to the books. I first read Monique Roffey's The Tryst this month. I've read a couple of her novels before, and this is so different. Her last novel, House of Ashes, was this brutal and clear-eyed depiction of a military coup in a fictional Caribbean island. But this new novel is about a couple who go out drinking one night. They meet a diminutive woman named Lila, and all three of them go home together. It follows all the complications and messiness of this tryst, but it's a lot more complicated than it first appears because Lila is not all that she seems. It goes into explicit detail about all their physical sexual acts in a way which is somewhat transgressive. Like if you've read George Bataille's classic novel, The Story of the Eye, it somewhat reminded me of that because it's not just kinky, it's sacrilegious. Not in a gratuitous way though, because what Monique Roffey shows is how emotionally complicated sex really is. It's not just the physical act. There is so much more tied up in sex. There's power, shame, revenge, boredom. It's a complicated business. And the author shows this so creatively by flipping between the perspectives of the three people involved in this tryst, which almost destroys all of them. And you get the sense in each of their accounts that they believe that they're the ones that are in control and they're controlling the situation, but really none of them are controlling the situation at all. It's a fascinating and clever novel, and the story also involves a tomcat named Choo Choo. Next I read Hollie McNish's new book, which is called Plum. It was so funny when my boyfriend saw me reading this, and he was like, "Oh, a new book?" And I said, "Yeah, it's about poetry." And he said, "Poetry?" Which is a reaction that I think a lot of non-poetry reading people have when talking about poetry. It's like a wall goes up, or it's like you're talking about joining a cult. I mean, what's that all about? I think some people see poetry as really perplexing and distancing, but this poetry in particular is so engaging and relatable. McNish writes quite frankly about sex and sexual development and all the shame that surrounds sex and our bodies in society. She confronts and challenges our ideas about social norms in a way which is so refreshing. And the way in which she's written this is so creative and easy to get into. Many of the poems are headed by the age that McNish was when she wrote them and have a short paragraph explaining the context in which she wrote them. This not only helps the reader understand the motivation behind them, but builds an ongoing narrative of a girl who is growing into a woman, a worker, a friend, a lover, a wife, a mother, a citizen, and a poet. We see her change from a teenager who works at a chemist's and sniggers at customers who buy condoms to a woman who feels embarrassed going into a chemist's buying condoms. The collection as a whole beautifully captures a sense of McNish's evolution as a person and as a writer as her style changes over time. It's gorgeous, and here's a taste. This is a poem called Unlike the Lads. There were 3 types of virginity loss we girls would chat about at school. Sex while sober, which often came years after. Sex while drunk, though both of those still years before. Sex that helped us come. Hollie McNish also has a YouTube channel herself where you can see her read a number of her poems. So if you click show more, I'll put a link down to that below. It's really worth checking out because she's a powerful performer, and I was lucky enough to see her read a number of months ago. And finally, I read Neel Mukherjee's new novel, A State of Freedom. Neel is so good at writing the openings of novels. Both this novel and his last novel, The Lives of Others, have such powerful, shocking openings that really grip you and lead you into the story. This novel begins with an Indian man who has lived for a long time in America, who takes his son to India to visit a number of tourist sites. He feels this conflicted sense of identity seeing his native country through Western eyes. So he has feelings of guilt mixed with anxiety and disgust. And something so surprising and eerie happens to him and his son. I won't give any spoilers. The novel goes on to describe the lives of a few different individuals who are loosely connected. There's a lot about cooking in here because there's a man who returns to India from England because he's researching a cookbook. There's a heartrending story of a performing bear, and then there's a story of a girl who grows up to be a maid. That all sounds like a random collection of different kinds of stories, but it all comes together really to make this powerful story about class and national identity. It's an astonishingly good read, and I highly recommend it. Maybe Booker Prize potential again this year? I hope so. So that's what I've been reading. Have you read any of them, or are you interested in reading any of them now? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know what book you've been snuggling up with in bed. Thanks for watching. I'll speak to you soon, and happy reading!